it sounds as though the government's going to go pretty big, pretty generous on this. It comes on top of the doubling of Newstart as well. Does government get a tick here for really prioritising helping people get through this?
Well, I think that, well, let's see, the devil's obviously going to be in the detail, so let's see whether they do include some of the things that the Labor Party has been pushing for. Obviously, no one wants to see a repeat of those Centrelink queues. That is absolutely abhorrent and is not happening in other countries we would consider our equal. In the United Kingdom, for example, that has not happened there. So let's see what happens, what comes in the package. I think, though, that obviously it is going to be big, because if there's a question that the Parliament is going to be recalled to vote on the appropriation bills, it's obviously larger than the $40 billion in the Finance Minister's advance that was granted, or that was agreed to at the last Monday when the Parliament sat.
Yeah.
So we'll see what's in the detail.
Yeah, no, you're right. It does sound like it'll be big in scope. Fair enough. We'll see the detail on that. There is some detail to come on the banning of evictions, so a moratorium on evictions. Labor was calling for this. What happens here for someone, for example, who doesn't get evicted from a residential home? Who picks up the tab for that? Because the banks announced deferring mortgages. That ultimately, that money still goes on the person with the mortgage. They end up with extra loan to pay off after 6 months. In terms of an eviction on a moratorium on evictions, what happens at the end of that 6 months? Does the person have to pay back the money to the landlord? Is the landlord out of pocket? What should happen?
Well, I think this is, tenancy law is actually really a state government issue. So the states will have to either enact or to be involved in this process through a legislative, through some sort of process where there's a communication out. I think there are some matters that will need to be worked out, Tom, in doing this. Do people pay it back? I mean, I think, though, that if you look at the market environment, would you really be wanting to let out a property at this point in time? I would say not. And of course, we'll see. I mean, I'm aware certainly of some people in Melbourne who have already given rental forgiveness, particularly in commercial properties. I'm aware of someone who owns quite a substantial amount of commercial property in the city of Melbourne, and he has been giving rent, rent forgiveness, so they haven't been paying rent in his properties. And I think that really this is a matter of us all pulling together. And
and absolutely, for people that can afford to do that, that's great. But
that is, and I agree with you.
Yeah, Labor was at there early saying no evictions. What's the view then on who has to pick up the tab on that, missing money? There must be a view. Do all the parties share it?
Well, we'll see. And this also depends on what the banks are willing to do as well. And I think the banks have been actually really good on these issues. I think they've actually tried to come to the party and to think of creative ways of solving some of the issues that we're seeing now in significant economic issues, and that are probably going to be exacerbated as we continue. So I think that the states will have to be looking at their tenancy laws, and they may actually need to change as well.
Well, it's another announcement coming and detail to come as well. What we do know is the role of China in all of this. We can go to the so-called wet markets, the wild animal markets that allowed to pass this to humans. Then this shocking cover-up that allowed human-to-human transmission to be going on. And China, as I said, covering up, lying about this. How can China be held to account, or is that not going to happen?
Look, I think that, if you looked at the British newspapers over the weekend, there was pretty much across the board an expression of absolute anger about China's role in this. I think there's an article actually in the New Yorker, which I'm very happy to put up on my Twitter so people can find it, but it's about the start of this coronavirus. Of course, we know that other coronaviruses have originated from China. But in the case of this recent one, not every one of the 41 severe cases of pneumonia that was identified in Wuhan in December had a connection to the wet market. And that would seem to indicate that, in fact, it probably started earlier than December. The unfortunate part about covering this up is that, let's say it started October, November, that's at least a couple of months where people could have actually recreated the virus. They then actually had testing kits a lot earlier. Would northern Italy, which of course is the number one destination for very elite Chinese to travel to, plus of course there's a connection in northern Italy with the textile markets there and some of the fashion that's created in China, northern Italy may have taken steps a lot earlier to close off direct flights. And I think then from that point of view, from actually a much more incipient beginning, we could have actually had a better response much earlier. And I think it's unfortunate that China did seek to cover this up. And of course, we've seen in the past with SARS, for example, where the Chinese authorities cracked down on the wet markets, and of course they've since flourished again. Now, I think that one of the indices has been the pangolin, which is a spicy anteater. That is considered a delicacy in China. It's something the elite eat, so it's seen as a sort of a status symbol. It's not only is the meat considered a delicacy, so the pangolin is something they think the horseshoe bats in the region infected, which was then transferred to humans. Yeah,
which is the line that goes through there.
That's right. So and those wet markets where the pangolins are sold are actually, there's such interspecies connection in those markets. There is no need for those markets. What we are seeing is they are endangering not just Chinese people, but people around the world.